Hello and welcome to Purely Academic, your potentially educational podcast for the month of March 2025. I'm Dr. Jonathan Lack. I write about movies. I teach cinema studies at the University of Colorado, and I've had it up to here with all these fucking student emails. It's pissing me off. There's so many. We're given my midterm next week. People who didn't read the syllabus, apparently didn't know we had a midterm in a class. They're telling me they got oh my God. I've had it up to here, Sean.
And I'm Sean Chapman, high school English teacher by day, otaku by night, and now by order of the Emperor, general who vanquishes barbarians, the general who pacifies the South, and of course, the general who is firm and majestic. Maybe we need to add on to this, general who deals with his email inbox.
Yes. Is that as bad for you, Sean, as it is for me at the high school level, or is it parents emailing you more? What is it?
It's more parent emails. Like, I would be actually ecstatic if my students had the wherewithal to email about things related to their academics. In terms of emails, it's more like you get a billion emails from random things that just trawl through public email data and just send you random
that
teacher
sucks.
bullshit. But they're easy to filter out because basically almost every single email that has the external tag, you can just sort of ignore. That's not part of the school system or not a registered parent email. You just can kind of filter out. But that is more my email situation. It's here's 1,000 different promos for some random educational tool that some random dude came up with that he wants every single public school teacher on the planet to know about.
Yeah, I get some of those, but as a college teacher, I get a lot of people trying to justify their absences from class. I get people telling me even though you had the midterm on the syllabus from before class started and you told us about it on day one and it's been public information, I did schedule X, Y, and Z on the midterm date. Can you give me a makeup? And there's been a lot of that going around. And I think I'm over the worst of it because I'm starting to give this next. But basically, my entire week coming up is giving the midterm to different groups of students Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So I will have a lot of time to work on other projects while they are sitting around taking tests. But in any case, one of those projects will be editing together this whole episode of Purely Academic, where we have a lot going on today. We've got some news. We've got a show and tell where we'll be talking more about, and I believe this was what your intro was about, Sean, the game Dynasty Warriors Origins.
Yes.
Having a big Romance of the Three Kingdoms inspired intro there. We're going to have our first ever listener mail segment on Purely Academic, which was really great. You guys gave us some really fun questions, and that was a very fun segment where we went kind of crazy long on. We've got one of the most fun monthly 10s we have had so far, where you challenged me to come up with basically new TV shows based on the premise of Dragon Ball Daima and or GT, where characters become young. Speaking of anime, we've got to make sure we are pumping our new season, because season 5 of Japanimation Station, our grand tour, is premiering March 16th, later this month. If you are not yet subscribed to Japanimation Station, please go over there. We've got such a great season coming for you, where we are going to be covering a bunch of different anime. We're covering Dragon Ball GT, 2 versions of Dororo, the original 1998 Yu-Gi-Oh!, the original Gunbuster made by the people who made the new Gundam thing, Berserk 97, and of course Dragon Ball Daima to tie it all together. It's going to be a fantastic season, and we're so happy to finally get it out into the world, starting later this month, again on March 16th. So make sure you're catching up with that. First off, though, Sean, do you want to talk about what's going on in the news?
Yeah. Oh, that's usually I throw this to you, but that's right. This is one of the times where Jonathan neglected to fill in the news, so I said, "Fuck it, I'm going to put some news on the outline." This is a roast to Jonathan intro to the Purely Academic. So yes, there's a few things that happened in particularly video game news that I wanted to make sure that we addressed. First of all, I just think the most important announcement that's really happened so far in the year 2025 is they have already announced what the game of the year for 2025 is going to be. And it is Digimon Story Time Stranger, the follow-up to Digimon Story Cyber Sleuth, one of the great pieces of art of our time. And now the sequel's coming out sometime later this year in 2025. This was announced at the Sony State of Play they had recently. I just felt like, it wouldn't be us, Jonathan, if we didn't at least mention, put it on everyone's radar. Digimon Story Time Stranger, it's coming. Get your Digimon ready, because it's fucking going to be here, finally.
If you are not a long-time listener of the weekly stuff, you might not know that was a game we got obsessed with in 2016, Digimon Story Cyber Sleuth, to the point that it was my game of the year that year. It was my number one, and I do not regret that at all. There are some number ones I regret. That is not one of them. good number one that year. But yeah, the segment where you introduced Digimon Story Cyber Sleuth, and I basically bought the game online while you were talking because it sounded so cool. Still one of my favorite segments ever, but that segment is, I'm sorry to tell you, Sean, 9 years old.
Oh God. I mean, I still remember, like, it's my main thing. My favorite thing about the video game franchise Tomb Raider is that the Tomb Raider reboot game fucking glitched the fuck out for me. I couldn't finish it, and I was so annoyed by that I needed a different game to play because the game I was playing was glitched, that I just randomly bought Digimon Story Cyber Sleuth on a whim right around when it came out, and then was like, oh, this is 1,000 times better. That Tomb Raider reboot was fine. It's no Digimon Story Cyber Sleuth, and then the rest was history. But yes, Digimon Story, Cyber Sleuth, and Hacker's Memory, both great games. If you are into JRPGs that are particularly of the kind of like monster catching variety, your like Personas, your Pokemon, right? And specifically in the like RPG side of those things, is where you have a lot of similarities. It's just one of the best games of that type you can really imagine. And I'm very excited for Time Stranger because it has been a very, very long time that this game has been in development.
Yes. So I'm psyched. I have them, the 2-pack of Digimon Story, Cyber Sleuth, and Hacker's Memory sitting on my Switch, and they've been waiting for a replay for a long time. So maybe I will try that later this year, because that would be fun. And they're on my Switch, so it's a little easier to play on the go and stuff. I am curious, they announced this for PC, PlayStation 5, Xbox. I wonder if this is a Switch 2 game that they can't say yet, because the Switch 2 has not been formally fully unveiled. But it feels like it would be weird if Digimon Story wasn't there, but we shall see.
Yeah, and the trailer, the trailer doesn't give you a lot about the game, but it did not appear to be something that would not be able to run on what we understand of the Switch 2. I mean, the original Digimon Story Cyber Sleuth was a fucking PS Vita game. That's how old that is. So, yeah, like I have to assume that probably it will be available on the Switch 2 when that is a thing that people can, like, more properly officially say. Right now we're in this weird dead time between, we know the Switch 2 has been officially announced, but feels like nobody's willing to actually announce their Switch 2 games until Nintendo has their big, full, proper reveal that's going to happen in April.
Sean, here's how much time has passed since Digimon Story Cyber Sleuth. The way I played that game, because I wanted a Nintendo Switch before a Nintendo Switch existed, was I had it on my PS4, and then I also bought it on Vita, and you could do the
transfarring?
Kojima would call, yes, the transfarring. That's, I think Kojima's the only one who ever called it that.
Yes.
But you could do the transfarring between the systems, and it was basically like the Switch, but instead of one system, it's just your save backed up to the cloud. And now you can just do that with a Nintendo Switch. But back in the old days of 2016, you had to have two separate systems, one of which was a dying handheld from Sony. But it worked, well enough.
Yeah, I never bought the Vita version, but I remember grinding in that game by streaming remote play to my Vita while doing something else, and just getting the Numemon or whichever one you needed to get to give you extra XP, and just automatically triggering random battles and just getting everybody up to level 99 over and over again. It was great. It's a great game. I'm very, very happy that we're getting a sequel because it's just been developed for so long. But I do feel bad for every other game coming out this year. Everyone was going to be like, if GTA 6 actually ends this year, that will be the thing. It's like, no, the real thing is Digimon Story Time Stranger. You guys are all fools.
I am so excited in about 8 months to do the episode where I put Digimon Story Time Stranger above GTA 6 on my Game of the Year, because that is going to make me so happy.
Yes, I mean, as memory serves, Digimon Story Cyber Sleuth wasn't even your number one game of the year in 2016 when we started recording that podcast. It became it midway through us doing that podcast. It suddenly rose up through the ranks to end up at your number one.
It had been my number two, and then I decided, while we were talking about it, no, I'm lying to myself. My heart wants Digimon, and so I followed my heart and put it on there, and I've never been happier. You gotta follow your heart.
Exactly. That's the Digimon way.
Indeed.
There were a couple of other games at that Sony State of Play alongside Digimon Story Time Stranger. A lot of them aren't big on my radar, but one game that I just personally want to shout out because I am very excited for it. They have announced for 2016 the game Saros, developed by Housemarque, which will be the follow-up to their game Returnal, which is your early PS5 game. And Returnal kicks all kinds of ass. That game was so good. And Saros looks like it's not like a literal sequel in a like narrative sense. It's a different character. It seems like it's in a different setting, but it's the same sort of thing. Like they're clearly telling you, hey, it's going to be another sort of roguelike esque shooter. There's a great shot where they zoom in on the main character's eyes, and you see these reflected like bullet hell style bullets coming at him in a spiral pattern, which is incredibly goofy, but also very like, we're just telling you the game is going to be a follow-up to Returnal. And I'm just personally very excited for that. And I just Returnal is so good. If people have not played it, that would be a fun game to go back to on your PS5. Because it is extremely good, and so I'm excited that they're making a sequel and that Housemarque is sticking with that style, because it's a game that I think like is amazing, but is also their first stab at a game quite like that. There aren't really any other games quite like that, so it is ripe for refinement in a good sequel. So I'm excited for that.
Absolutely. I will be honest, the only piece of news I followed out of the PlayStation thing was Digimon, so I did not know this, but I like Housemarque, and I haven't played Returnal yet. It's one I want to, but I like that they're flourishing over at Sony, being one of the only studios that's got more than one actual PS5 game out. That's cool.
Yes, that would be true. All right, then we have, this will probably be a little bit of a bigger conversation, but it feels like something we need to talk about. Microsoft came out and they announced they have been working on a research project for AI in the world of video games called Project Muse, which is a sort of a complicated thing. Don't get too deep into the weeds. Just the basics of it are, it is still a research project, so it's not like a product or something that you can engage with, but it is their attempt to use AI to do seemingly two different things based on what I understand. They have trained the model on the Ninja Theory game Bleeding Edge, which, if you don't remember what that is, of course you don't, because if nobody does, it was like a failed third-person shooter multiplayer game that Ninja Theory put out. That was either a late period Xbox One or early period Xbox Series game. I mean, it was just a game that came and died. But it is obviously doesn't really matter for the nature of the research project. They just trained their AI model on huge amounts of footage of Bleeding Edge. I assume they had to produce a lot of that footage themselves, because I can't imagine there's that much footage of Bleeding Edge online, pre-existing online. But the goal of it was to do two things. One thing is for the model to be able to reproduce or to produce video footage of an AI simulacrum of the game that you can tell it to put things in the game and see how players react, is my understanding of it, of like, what would happen if there was an ammo thing here on this level? And the AI goes, and then creates like a weird, shitty looking footage of something that resembles Bleeding Edge, but now there's an ammo crate there. It's like, oh, well, if the ammo crate's there, the player, based on our AI computation, would maybe go over there and get the ammo. Like, it's not particularly detailed, but that was sort of my sense of the thing that sounded like one might actually kind of maybe use. The other one is the notion of using the AI model to actually create a thing that you can put controller inputs in and play as though it were a video game. And they showed a brief footage of the blurriest thing you've ever seen running at like 5 frames per second of something that looks like someone's imagined dream of Bleeding Edge. And I guess you can press A on the controller and the thing will be like, oh, well then based on all this shit, I guess he should jump here maybe. And that seemed like what it was. A very kind of confused sort of research project announcement that, again, I think like every piece of reporting I saw on it kind of imagined it as something different, because as with a lot of AI stuff, it is sort of ambiguous. What is the value of this thing in the real world in which we all actually live?
So, Sean, here's what I've done. I went to ChatGPT and I gave it the prompt, explain to me why Xbox's Project Muse AI project is stupid and totally useless. And it actually gave me a pretty good response on this. Apparently, if you ask AI about why AI is bad, it could actually give you a pretty good response. It tells me that it has faced criticism from various quarters for several reasons. One, questionable efficacy in game preservation. Experts argue that this approach, that it has a whole stupid thing about game preservation, doesn't constitute true preservation. AI researcher and game designer Michael Cook labeled this idea as idiotic, emphasizing that Muse is more suited for assisting developers in testing environmental changes than authentically preserving games. Number 2, concerns over artistic integrity and job security. Number 3, skepticism about practical applications. Some developers question the practical benefits of Muse, suggesting it might be unnecessary. 4, doubts about AI's creative capabilities. There's skepticism regarding AI's ability to replicate the human creativity essential for producing compelling games. In summary, critics argue that Project Muse may not effectively address the challenges it aims to solve, and could potentially harm the artistic integrity of game development and the job security of developers. Yeah, that's what I think about this. Is I'm just going to outsource my criticism of this stupid thing to ChatGPT, because that feels like the level on which this should be greeted.
Yeah, well, the one part of it that I do want to zoom in on a little bit, because I brought in a quote. So there was this 10-minute video or something they did that had one of the people from the research team, it had one of the studio leads at Ninja Theory, and then it had Phil Spencer, obviously the head of Xbox, there, and they were talking about it. And that's where Phil Spencer has this quote that this is where that game preservation thing comes from. And I just wanted to point this out because it is maybe the stupidest fucking thing I've ever heard someone involved with video games ever say ever. And so I just want to, we just have to talk about it. So this is a direct quote from that podcast, where he said, "You could imagine a world where gameplay data in video that a model could learn old games from and really make them portable to any platform where these models could run. We've talked about game preservation as an activity for us, and these models and their ability to learn completely how a game plays without the necessity of the original engine running on the original hardware opens up a ton of opportunity." So this is where this notion that this would be used to preserve video games, like he specifically uses the term game preservation, of which I find it interesting. He refers to it as an activity for Xbox, which is an interesting word to refer to the act of preservation as. But the notion that the way to preserve video games is to train an AI model on huge quantities of video data of that video game being played, and then that AI model actively recreating that game for the player to play, consuming God knows how much energy in the server farms and shit to actually generate and produce this thing, not just to train the model, but to actually then create the output to do this, which to try to solve a problem that isn't a problem. There's this thing that I know Xbox knows exists because they're actually very good at it, called emulation, where you can actually play the video game and find ways to make the video game work, even if it's not running on original hardware. And it's sort of something we've been doing in the world of video games for 30 fucking years. And it turns out it's really good and way more efficient than having a thing try to tell us what the game was based on footage of the game, so it's actively trying to recreate the game in real time. That's absolutely insane. And also it doesn't make any sense on the other hand, because it also, the reason why these games are not accessible for people is not because of an inability for devices to run the video game. That's not the problem. That's not the reason why you can't play whatever game it is that you want to play. 9 times out of 10, the reason why you can't play those games is purely a rights thing. It's a legal barrier, right? So the game, for instance, No One Lives Forever, which we'll talk about in a second, because the studio that made that game was just shut down by WB Studios. But No One Lives Forever is a very famous example of a really popular PC game from the early 2000s that you cannot officially get in any channel because nobody knows who actually owns the rights to the game No One Lives Forever. It doesn't matter if an AI model recreates the game based on fucking Let's Play footage of people playing No One Lives Forever that you could only get, obviously, because people are playing the fucking game in the first place. So it is obviously accessible to some people to generate the data in order to make the thing, to fucking get the data for the thing to make the thing that you're playing that you need the data for, but you're trying to get because people can't get the data for. It makes no sense. The only reason why those games aren't available are almost always legal barriers, not technological barriers, and or they're commercial barriers where the people who own the IP do not see a reason to put the thing out because they don't think it's going to be worth their time or money. And AI costs a shit ton of fucking money. That stuff's not free to produce those results, especially if it's something that's going to be tried to be as complicated as a video game. So it just makes no fucking sense. On top of the notion that this preserves the game. What the fuck are you talking about? Are you high? That's not game preservation, dude. That's not what that means. Training an AI model to try to write its idea of what Hamlet is not the same thing as preserving a Shakespeare fucking first folio. Those are just totally different elements. Accessibility to the game is also not the same thing as preservation of the game. Preservation of the game means having the artifact of which the game like the original code, the original artifacts, having those preserved and at the very least a museum-like context so that they do not degrade and they become something that you can access in an academic or curious form for the rest of human history, ideally, right? It is not the same thing as like putting out something commercially available for people to access. That's not actually what preservation is. And it's just this notion of they're like, oh, we can use our AI model to quote unquote preserve games because that is an activity that Xbox likes to do, is so ass backwards and fucking stupid. And the only reason why he mentions it is because I am sure that at some meeting they're like, well, all the fucking people who know anything about anything hate this kind of AI that's just like generative AI to try to create art. Everybody hates that shit because it's fucking terrible all the time. Well, how do we get the hardcore gamers to like it? Tell them that it'll make them play the old games. Those old games they like. Just say the words game preservation and then like the fucking gamers will like it. It's like people aren't that fucking stupid. So everyone's making fun of Project Muse because it seems like it fucking sucks. It is insane, the notion of using it to generate a game for the sake of game preservation or otherwise. And it seems highly questionable based on what I've seen of developers talking about their extended uses for it as part of like a production tool, which is the only thing that AI conceivably could be potentially used as. But their like scenarios for it just seem insane and so research intensive to produce the data to create the model in the first place that I can't imagine anybody actually using it. And that's what I wanted to say about this.
No, and like here's the actual, to me, is that AI, and I think this is such a good example of this, it is the ultimate the Emperor's New Clothes situation, where it's a bunch of people standing around. They are invested in the idea that they have paid for this beautiful pair of clothes. And everyone has to see that they have a beautiful pair of clothes. So they have to talk out their ass pretending that their ass-naked bodies wearing nothing are actually clothed in amazing finery. And when you're doing that, you wind up just talking out your ass. And that's what Phil Spencer did. He has nothing to say. It's just bullshit. So he's just talking out his ass about something. He hasn't researched it. He hasn't looked into it. He hasn't thought it through. He's just talking out his ass because that's all this AI shit is. There are real use cases for AI tools, but they are within the creative workflow process. It's stuff like building in stuff to Photoshop that lets you paint stuff out of pictures more easily, right? Those sorts of things. If he had said, like, maybe we can use AI tools to help us build new emulation engines by analyzing X, Y, and Z, sure, I don't know how that would work, but like there's things you can do, but it's the generative AI bullshit that is the, what if we just replace the human element? What if we replace these things that, one, don't need replacing, and two, you're replacing it not with a, more energy efficient, more work efficient process, but a vastly less efficient process. That's where it just becomes insulting and stupid, and you're talking down to everyone, and we all know it, The use case for ChatGPT has turned out to be two things: plagiarizing your essays for school, or using it as a replacement for Google, where you will get worse results a lot of the time because you're not seeing the actual search, you're seeing an interpretation of a search that sometimes could spit out something useful. I'm not going to pretend that there's never a value to having AI scan stuff and try to summarize it for you, but the problem is that it's a super imperfect tool, and so you always have to double check the information if you're going to use it. And so this is the problem. We are at this case where we have this very limited, frankly, very weak set of tools that cannot do a lot of stuff. And it's been really interesting, and in some cases very depressing, to see these big companies pretend like it can do a lot and have to twist themselves into knots to advertise their AI stuff. Like, it's been fascinating for me to see Apple having to advertise their Apple Intelligence stuff, which I'm a Mac user, I'm an iPhone user. The actual implementation of Apple Intelligence, the thing I like about it is that it's just super easy to ignore. It's just you would not know it's there if they weren't telling you to go look for it. Like, it is not something built in a way that distracts you from your actual work. So that's great. But it's the thing that they're trying to sell their new iPhones and Macs on. So in all their ads, they're trying to do stuff like, what if I could write your email for you and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, guys, when Steve Jobs was alive, you were the people comparing yourselves to Einstein and doing the whole like think differently thing, and you were all about empowering creativity. And actually, not just when Steve Jobs was alive, up to about 6 months ago, that was still your entire advertising strategy, was creative people use Macs to do creative things. But now you've got this AI thing to sell, so now it is stupid people don't know how to type good on the keyboard, so you got to get the AI to do it for you, which I think is a weird thing to sell to an audience that for 40 years you've been selling a completely different conception of creativity to. So it's just hilarious to see everybody walking down this path, and, you know, a lot of them are going to lose a lot of they're all going to lose a lot of money on this. Some will be able to weather it better than others. Microsoft is stupid. Microsoft seems to be much more close to actually ruining all their stuff with AI, though, because I have heard nothing but bad things about where Windows 11 is going. So, yeah, this is dumb.
Well, Microsoft as a company has such huge investment in partnership with OpenAI, so it's like that's part of where this comes from. But yeah, I mean, it's really frustrating because it's like, you know, the tech industry has moved on from what it used to be cryptocurrency and blockchain, and then it jumped onto the fucking metaverse bullshit / like VR, and now it has jumped onto AI. And the thing that's frustrating is that this AI stuff has legitimate use cases that way predate this like current batch of like what people call AI, because obviously we also are like putting multiple different kinds of machine learning style technologies all under the banner of AI. So something like DLSS in the video game space, which predates the modern like conceptualization of what we're calling AI, is a quote unquote AI technology. It is machine learning. And these kinds of tools have existed for basically as long as computers have, to some extent or another. But it's like, they're taking something that has legitimate narrow use cases at when AI is good enough to do the thing, which is usually a very specific kind of task, and they're trying to make it a sort of like panacea, a cure-all, that anything you do, anything you want in your life, the AI will just do it for you better than you could do it because you're a dumb piece of shit that can't write an email, right? They have to insult their audience in order to lower their expectations enough to allow them to think like, oh, this thing will be good enough to send a text message to my mom that it doesn't actually pull from my fucking Google search history or whatever and put some like porn shit in there, you know? Or like the obviously like horrible things that could happen if the AI model gets that wrong. Which it very well can, because it is not actually intelligent. It is just a series of, of training data that it could eventually pull something aberrant at any point. And so they want to sell it to you as a panacea. They want to shove it into every single corner of their technology and their business in the exact same way that all these people did with fucking blockchain and NFT shit, in the exact same way that everybody and their grandma was trying to do some sort of metaverse fucking nonsense. And now they're just doing the same thing with AI. And it's actually more annoying because the technology does have legitimate applications, and they're ruining the things that it could do by trying to do everything else that it can't do at the same time. And it just, every time this shit keeps on coming up and it keeps on getting worse, it just pisses me off more and more. And now it's like going to be a big thing specifically in video games. And that's annoying.
Yeah, no, it sucks. It's stupid. And I think, for the exact reasons you just outlined, Sean, if anyone is ever trying to sell you the AI bridge and is like, AI is the future, you got to learn how to use AI, blah, 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 ask them what their position was a few years ago on crypto and the blockchain, and then ask them what their position was a few years ago on the metaverse and VR, and I guarantee you these people are hucksters who just latch onto this stuff without actually considering its real use cases, because that's what all of this is. It's a scam. Stupid. Speaking of scams, do you want to talk about WB Games?
Yes, WB Games, the biggest like crashing ship in the video game industry right now, basically. They have
That's saying something.
Yeah. I mean, they've been having a rough fucking time of it in many different ways of their own making. There's a whole bunch of stories that we could get into in terms of like the head of WB Games left very recently, or resigned, I guess, whatever word you want to use for it, in ignominy, because he did a terrible job. And part of the sort of fallout of all this kind of restructuring that's happening is that WB Games has shut down 3 different studios. Player First Games, which is the studio that made the game Multiverses, which is like the WB version of Super Smash Brothers. That one's sad because Player First Games was not originally a WB Games owned company. They made Multiverses and then WB bought them. And the Multiverses seemed like it was going to be a big hit, and then a lot of shit happened. They like kind of pulled it down, and they relaunched the game. And Multiverses is getting shut down. I think you can still do offline stuff, but the online modes are going to go away. So Player First Games, which got bought by WB Games, is now getting shut down by WB Games. They're also shutting down WB San Diego, which is a mobile game studio and a support studio. But the big news, if you're someone who really loves video games, is that they're also shutting down the studio Monolith, who was currently in development on a Wonder Woman game that has been in development for a long time now, and that game is also canceling its development. Monolith is a old school developer. They go back to the 90s. Like, they developed games on DOS on PC. That's how far back they go. And they've just made a lot of really great classic games, whether you're talking about No One Lives Forever, which I referred to earlier, which you can't legally play those games. Obviously, you can. They're PC games. You can play No One Lives Forever if you want to. You just can't buy No One Lives Forever from anybody. They made they made Fear 1 and Fear 2, both fantastic shooters from the original Xbox and, of course, on the PC, which the PC version's way better. They also made games like Condemned Criminal Origins, which is like a really great kind of cult hit from the launch of the Xbox 360. Like, Condemned and Call of Duty 2 were the two games you actually wanted to play on the launch of the 360 rather than Perfect Dark Zero and Cameo Elements of Power. Neither of those games were particularly good, but Condemned Criminal Origins was fantastic. But most recently, after they were acquired by WB Games, you would know them for the Middle-earth games. So Middle-earth Shadows of Mordor and Middle-earth Shadow of War. And of course, those games also had the Nemesis system, whereby the orc captains would have these sort of very dynamic roles in the game. And as you defeated them, they would come back and kind of like hunt you down, and have this very dynamic game system that was very cool that WB Games also patented, so nobody else can use anything that is too close to the Nemesis system. WB Games does still own the patent and will for like 10 years or something, but Monolith is no longer a thing. Most of the people at Monolith, like the top line people, had left the company some years ago because Monolith had pitched an original game to WB Games. The previous head of WB Games, that is no longer there, refused that project and basically got that project to be canceled. That's then when Monolith started making their Wonder Woman game. And that game, from what I understand, and through a Jason Schreier report, has gone through a lot of went through a lot of technical development, and they kind of rebooted its development at certain points because it had a hard time going. But now we'll never see the light of day because that game is also gone, along with Monolith as a studio that has like a 30-year long history. And this shit sucks. And it sucks that it's been like multiple years now, basically post the COVID boom, where the video game industry is just hemorrhaging talent, shutting down so many studios left and right. And it's just really, really, really frustrating to seeing this continue to happen in this industry.
Taking a step back, it is just insane that WB Games is WB. It has the rights to some of the biggest properties in the world. All the DC characters, obviously, but then a ton of other stuff, like Looney Tunes, like Multiverses, who they also shut down that developer, and like all sorts of things that they could make video games out of. And I'm not saying the way to make good video games is just to slap IP on them, but it is a thing you can do to make money, right? And like the fact that the last major game they got out from this publisher that like worked was Batman Arkham. What was the last one called? Arkham Arkham Knight. 10 years ago now. That was 2015. And they had Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League finally came out and bombed so hard it like broke their studio. They haven't been able to get a Wonder Woman game out. They haven't been able to get a Superman game out. None of this stuff. Like the level of mismanagement to say we have this catalog and we can do nothing with any of it, and we're just shutting, great studios and all this institutional talent and knowledge left and right. It's breathtaking. It's like breathtaking levels of mismanagement.
Yeah. And one thing that's particularly salty is, so the guy who took over, I don't have his name, I don't really care what his name is, but he's the new head of WB Games. He had some quote talking about what we, in order to get back to profitability, like what we're going to do is we're going to pivot towards our major IPs, which is like Game of Thrones and Harry Potter, and Batman and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, that's all you've been doing. It's like, I don't understand how that's a pivot. Like, all your games are based on WB IP. It has been for so long. That's not your problem. Isn't that you're not trying to fucking make games based on your IP. It's that you can't make good games or you're fucking over your own studios while they're trying to make their games that are based on the IP that you own. Right? Like, it's like, what game have you been making that is not one of your big popular IPs? I mean, I guess, I would obviously say that trying to make a Suicide Squad game was a bad idea, but that was an entire WB company push that you made all this Suicide Squad shit top to bottom, whether it's your live action movies, your animated movies, whatever. So it makes sense from that perspective that, well, of course you'd fucking make a game based on it, because all of your different arms of your company are pushing Suicide Squad super hard. So it's like, you've clearly as a company decided that that's a big IP for you. That's like, all the shit you're making are big IP things. Like, the problem isn't that you don't own the IP or that people aren't using your IP. It is that your publisher has not been able to manage your studios to encourage your studios to like make the games that they're good at, or give them the space to make the games that they want to make. Right? They lost most of their big Monolith people because they shut down the game that Monolith wanted to make. And it's just like, I'm skeptical of the new guy's ability to do a lot to right this ship. Hopefully he will do better than the last guy, but it just, like, the quotes that he had coming into the job just didn't feel like, they weren't very inspiring. They're all about like, oh, within 2 to 3 years we can get this back to profitable. As long as we pivot to using our IP. I'm like, fucking any random dude in a suit you could pull up and have him say that shit. Like, it just didn't feel like something that made you be like, have a lot of confidence in the future of that company, that they got some random suit to come up here and talk about profit and IP for the news organizations. It just sucks.
Do you have any good news for us, Sean?
Digimon Story Time Stranger, just a reminder, that game's coming out.